All right. Well, in today's discussion, I have my friend Bruce Turner back with me. And today we're going to be talking about how you can rise up from the mailroom to the boardroom. And I have to tell you, Bruce is a great case study and example of this because I know, the fact that you're listening to this means you're probably somebody who wants to improve yourself in your career. And so we're going to show you exactly how that's done and the type of leader that you need to be in order to move up like that. So whatever you do, make sure that you listen through and learn how you can rise up from the mailroom to the boardroom. So with that, let's bring in Bruce.
G'day, Jason.
G'day, Bruce. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
I know, and it's always good to have one of my Aussie friends on with me because then I can actually use the word mate, and everybody it doesn't look at me. I got really weird, right? But yeah, I know, we talked a couple times before and wanted to make sure and have you back because you just finished up a new book, right, called Rising from the Mailroom to the Boardroom. Unique insights for governance, risk, compliance, and audit leaders. So again, that's been your lane, if you will, professionally, kind of in that area. But again, just for anybody who's listening, if you're not in that area, don't worry, because what we're going to be talking about today are some of the concepts and kind of character traits you need to have in order to be able to do that, right? And I think, Bruce, we've talked before, but you got people asking you all the time, right? Hey, Bruce, how do I do that? How do I move up? How do I get promoted in the organization, right? Because I know that I think you've mentored quite a few people over your career to be able to help them get there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the mentoring started through programs through the Institute of Internal Auditors, and I still do some of those. And then it's morphed into mentoring of chief executives and mentoring of board chairs, because whilst they might be specialists within their area of activity, professors or doctors or whatever, they're not familiar with some of the fundamentals of governance, risk, compliance, assurance, and so forth. So I bring to the table some of those insights that I can share and help them, run their organisation better if they're a chief executive, or run their board better if they're a board chairman. And it's worked really well. And that sort of prompted me to think, well, lots of people asking me for advice. So why don't I try to capture some of those insights that I've gained over the years and do it through a storytelling type approach? So it's been a lot of fun to pull together.
Well, yeah, because I think, you like to use the stories, and obviously having been in your career as long as you have, I mean, maybe in case this is the first time somebody's heard you talk in here, maybe let's just give kind of a quick thumbnail of how your career kind of moved, because I mean, literally from the title of the book, you started off in the mailroom. You did some very entry level jobs and ended up moving up into being, a top executive in some of the largest organizations down there in Australia, to where now you sit on boards. You have sat on boards of directors, for quite a while. So you're a great example of somebody who, with drive and dedication, and we're going to use some other words later, but intention, right, have been able to move up in your career. So just kind of give people just a very brief snapshot of how your career kind of shot up, and then we'll jump in and help give them okay, so this is how you can be like Bruce.
Sounds good, Jason. So it's this year that I started working 50 years ago. And I started in a junior banker position. And one of the things I used to do each day as a junior banker was go to the post office with a loaded pistol. And we used to cash in what they call money orders. It didn't go through the settlement system in those days. So I would be this teenage kid walking up the street with a loaded pistol to collect a few $100s worth of postal orders. And it didn't make any sense to me at the time because I'd been given no training. So
they just handed you a loaded gun and said, go cash these.
Yeah, it was a little bit scary when you look at it in hindsight. And one of the things that we have these days, of course, is a risk appetite statement of the board. So that's kind of connecting both ends of the spectrum. So from the junior banker position, I spent a bunch of years, probably 30 odd years in the banking system, in commercial banking, merchant banking, and in the central bank. And, the early career, I was quite a successful young banker and the top banker in the state at one stage. But then I moved into the internal auditing profession. And I'm glad I did, because it's given me the opportunity to not just work within my local area here, but I've worked throughout Australia. I've worked in developing nations like Papua New Guinea. I've worked in financial centres like London and New York. So it's given me that opportunity to experience the world. So from internal audit roles, I've morphed into a chief audit executive. I've been responsible for risk management, for compliance, for a range of other activities at that executive oversight level. And from there, I morphed into an audit committee chairman and ultimately a director on several different boards. And what we try to do in the book is pull together experiences at every different level that I've gone through, because there are insights. There's insights in terms of carrying a loaded pistol, and it kind of doesn't make sense for a young kid, but certainly it wouldn't make sense in the boardroom.
It's got to be exciting though as a kid, right? I mean, it's like, well, because there was the old joke, when I was going through accounting in college, right? And it was like, okay, folks, there's a few what we called pistol packing CPAs. And so if you were in the US, if you work for the Department of Treasury, you get to carry a gun. If you worked for the FBI, you get to carry a gun, right? But normally you wouldn't think of that from banking. But I want to bring up, because again, as I told everybody, who's listening or watching this, right, is you're going to learn things as we're talking that are relevant regardless of what profession you happen to be in. And so what I heard you say in there too was, you started off as a banker, and then you really kind of switched profession, if you will. And I know a lot of people are really scared to do that, because they think, no, I come out of college, I've got certain skill set, I have to do this for the next 40 or 50 years of my life. But you're evidence that you don't have to do that, right? I mean, you moved from being a banker to going into internal audit to risk management to some other things, and ultimately to a board member. So if I'm hearing you right, it's okay to change career trajectory even partway through, right? You're still going to be okay.
Absolutely. And it was pretty scary for me when I moved from commercial banking into the central bank, because I'd worked with the same organisation for 18 years at that point in time. And I had a young family, and there's a hell of a risk you take, or you think you're taking this risk. You don't know whether you've got the capability to do that other job. And commercial banking is very, very different to central banking.
Oh, yeah.
So even that sort of decision in the same sector was quite scary. But I got in there and I thought, wow, this is pretty good. And then they went through a structural change. Every senior manager at the time, including myself, I'd only been there 6 months, had to reapply for their jobs. So,
and here you have a young family and kids.
Absolutely. So
well, you probably moved to, if you were at Central Bank, did you have to move to Canberra too, or were you got to stay?
I could do it in Sydney.
You could still do it in Sydney, okay?
Yeah, which is probably, it was probably 3 hours a day commuting for me there and back. But that gave me time to read things that I needed to do for work and so forth. But that was especially worrying, because we were competing then. The jobs were opened up to the world. Anybody with a capability could apply for it. It took a few months, and then things settled down and I was reappointed. But even that is especially worrying, because you don't know what you're going to get into. And then later on, as you get a bit older, a bit wiser, a bit more experienced, changing roles is less difficult, because you know what you've got and you've got the confidence to go in and make the changes you need to make. So my final job was as the Chief Audit Executive at the Australian Tax Office. And I was recruited into the role, and a lot of the people were based down in Canberra, which is 3 hours drive from my home. And, met the Deputy Commissioner on the first day and a bunch of other executives, and then went out to meet my team in one of the outer suburbs of Canberra. And I'd actually come prepared. I came prepared with my first 100 days plan. I came prepared with a PowerPoint presentation. The Deputy Commissioner nearly fell off his chair. He was so stoked with how prepared I was. But I gave the message to the staff then, and I could see the doubts. We've heard all this before, is this going to happen or not? And of course, I then chose out the biggest doubters and gradually brought them behind me. And it was through their efforts that we're able to make the changes that we needed to make. Really exciting. So yeah, you can change careers, and I think it's really important to evolve. It's no use having a 30-year career and doing the same thing year on year. You've got to branch out. You've got to have a sense of accomplishment, and if you're doing the same thing all the time, you often don't get that.
Well, I like what you said there too, because with age, right, we've all got a little, or at least you and me have a little bit more gray or white hair than we used to have. But it's, it's over time. You used the word confidence too, because I think, again, a lot of people struggle with confidence and they want to be more confident. But how do you get more confident? It's by going through some of the experiences, right? Because like you said, the first time that you change jobs, you change roles, you change companies, right? It's scary because we've never done it before. But the more we do it, the easier it becomes, I think, right?
It does, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, so again, it's the, don't worry about, don't think that you have to have everything figured out. Because again, I'm guessing that, when you started off, you had no idea that 50 years later in your career, you would be where you were at.
Oh, not at all. No.
Not at all, right?
And that's the interesting thing. You actually don't know what the journey is, but along the journey, you're picking up fresh skills, and those fresh skills make you marketable in the eyes of others. And that's something that we need to, that sort of interest, that enthusiasm to learn and continue our professional development is something that I would like to encourage people to do, because you just don't know where it's going to take you.
Yeah, and that's one of the big topics that I am big about, is that enthusiasm to learn, right? Because again, it's we never know where we're going to get, and life does take these twists and turns. And sometimes maybe it feels like I don't really understand why this is happening to me, but later on we learn why, right? At the time, we don't necessarily have the benefit of hindsight, because you don't have hindsight until until you turn around and look backwards, right?
You don't. And when I was first approached to take on a role at a merchant bank, on secondment from my bank, a commercial bank, who had a 50% stake with the merchant bank, and I was there to head up the internal audit function and establish its inaugural internal audit function. And I was still pretty young. But I was a successful banker. Every training course I went to within the bank, I was topping. So I should have had more confidence than probably what I did. And when I was first asked to do it, I said, no, I won't. And this was one of those things where you go there for 12 months and you come back to your core role. So the risk was pretty limited, but still having that confidence to do it was something that I learned over the years. And of course, you go in there and you're learning a whole new thing, because the other stakeholder in the organisation was a German bank, and they do things very differently in Germany than they do in Australia and US and UK. So learning fresh things then, and you kind of think afterwards, well, that wasn't too bad. I can actually do that. I can hold my own where there's other people who are really high profile and still do a good job and have the confidence of management to succeed.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is that, I think sometimes people, they get the cart before the horse. They want the confidence before they do anything, but confidence comes from doing the things.
It does.
Right. So until you actually, get in there and do it, you're not going to have the confidence because that comes from the doing. But I wanted to kind of go back to what you were saying, when you went into the, I think it was to the tax authority. And you made a comment, about some of the people kind of being the naysayers and you kind of being able to pick them out. Because I know one of the things that we wanted to make sure and talk about, and this is what, at least where I see a lot of people in their failings, is their lack of the people side of the role, right? And so especially in the profession that you and I have come up in, a lot of it is around the technical things that we need to have. And so leaders tend to get promoted because they're technically competent. But what I see is that there tends to become a point when people are kind of, how do I say this, over promoted, maybe and so you've probably seen it working with executives. I've seen it working with executives as well, to where somebody gets to a point and they all of a sudden they realize they kind of, stick their head up and they're like, holy shit, I don't know how to lead people. I never got really taught some of these things. So what are some of these, the people side of the stuff that really, for us to be able to move forward in our career, to grow, to have some of these other opportunities, what are some of these people side of things that we need to be focusing on and actually kind of develop as skills?
It's a really good question. You hear a lot of business leaders talk about people being the most important asset. And I think that's really true. So within the book, we talk about the 101 building blocks. So each of those is a unique set of skills that are necessary for people. So one of the things that we delve into is the onboarding of younger people. We need to do it thoughtfully. It's important to maintain a fun business environment. It's important for us to be able to identify talent. It's important for us to be able to leverage emotional intelligence, to invest in personal professional growth, and to understand a personal brand. We need to do that for ourselves, but encourage our people to do that as well. We also need to inspire people by recognising good performance. And we also need to take the hard decisions at time and deal with poor performance. So each of those elements there fits into a separate building block. And we actually delve into it. I actually tell stories about some of my personal experiences. And it's not all easy going. We make mistakes along the way, but we learn from those mistakes. So each of those building blocks is introduced through a personal story. And then we talk about what it means for the readers. This is what you should be considering doing. And this is what it'll mean for you and for your career and your success and the success of your people. And that's part of the fun of it. You're hearing these stories and you can have a bit of a giggle at times of some of the events that have taken place in my life, but it actually informed my learning and informed what I can share with others through mentoring and through storytelling in books like this.
Well, because I'm, I'm guessing that over a 50-year career, you probably made some mistakes.
Oh, yes.
So here's another learning for everybody who's listening, right? Is that, again, I see so many people that they're afraid to do anything because they're afraid to make a mistake, right? But you were talking about, kind of being this curious learner, and actually learning along the way. I mean, we don't really learn until we actually try something and we get some kind of feedback, I think, as well, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe let's, a lot of those things that you just kind of threw out there around, emotional intelligence, about things like recognizing the work of others. I mean, that's a huge thing that so many leaders don't do for their people. Another one is around having fun, right? So maybe let's talk a little bit about those three, because again, I know those are some things people are talking about, but what does it really mean, and how can we actually do that?
Well, let's start with having fun. We go to work and we spend so much time at work each and every day. We share our lives with people at work, and we probably see some of them more often we see our own families. And I certainly did that when I was traveling a lot in internal auditing, as you do, and you meet a lot of new people. But one of the things that's really important there is to underpin that with a sense of fun, have a bit of joy, share some joy as well. So one of my most important roles as a chief audit executive at the Australian Tax Office was getting out and judging competitions they had within the Penrith site, which is my home site, and I was the most senior executive there. We had 1,400 people, and some of those were very operational roles, like call centres. Some of those were around compliance, dealing with people who weren't prepared to pay their fair share of tax, and everyone.
That's a nice way of saying it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Tax cheaters. I mean, yeah.
Well, yeah. But one of the things I used to do was judge competitions, whether it's the Easter parade or something like that, or whether it's Christmas decorations around the site. I'd get around and I would be doing this sort of judging. Had really no idea, about what was better in terms of this location and all the Christmas decorations, or this one over here. But I participated in that willingly, and it took away, sometimes several hours at time. But I got around the site. People got to know me, not just as Bruce the executive, but hey, here's Bruce the human being, and Bruce, who's an avid rugby league football supporter of a particular local team, and of course. We still have the banter now. When I retired, they put on a wonderful retirement function for me at the Penrith office. I had one in Canberra as well. But they invited along to that the Penrith P Panther, who was the individual dressed up in a Panther suit, and he appeared at every Penrith game. So he was one of the VIPs with the Commissioner of Taxation. But that's how it can translate. It can translate by having a sense of fun to making people aware of your identity, your personality, and therefore their willingness to come behind you. So I think that's a really good example of that. And it made it unique that here's Bruce at his retirement function having the Penrith Panther mascot, which I think is pretty amazing. And of course, the media picked up on that, and there were stories in the local newspapers about the taxman retiring and here's Penrith Pete Panther, So it combines a few of those. But by people seeing the real you and understand your values and understand your vision, they'll often come behind you. And I also cite the example of on Harmony Day, which is bringing people together, and the colour orange is synonymous with Harmony Day. So on one occasion there, I wore an orange suit, an orange tie, an orange shirt, and everything orange to a function in the Penrith site. There was several hundred people there. And later that day, I was talking to the chair of the audit committee, who was 300 kilometres away in Canberra. And they said, tell me, what's this about this orange suit?
So the news had made it all the way to Canberra.
It does, yeah. It does. And again, that just adds to, what people know about you and hear about you. But it builds that personal brand, which I think is really important.
Well, I think I love what you said there. Let people see the real you, because I think, again, this is one of those things that I've seen, and it has so many negative effects, right? Is that if we're not who we really are, if we don't show up and act authentically, that's a word that some people are using now too, then we feel this psychological disconnect inside, which can lead to depression. It can lead to a whole bunch of different things, right? But what I hear you saying too is that we're actually a better leader, and people will follow behind us, and we establish a better brand for ourselves, which again, that brand is what's helping to catapult people in their careers. So the fact that you are a rugby, follower is a good thing, right? It's not something that you need to hide and be ashamed of, right? That when you show up in all orange, to kind of go along with Unity Day, it's cool, right? It's okay.
Yes,
it gets people to talk. It gets people to see who Bruce is as a human being, instead of somebody who's just cold and flat, right?
Very true. So let me just pick up there. So I was based in the Penrith site, which is an hour out of Sydney. There's another site, Parramatta, which is half an hour out of Sydney. And the second most senior person in the tax office, a lady called Jenny Granger, was based down in Canberra. But Jenny came from Sydney, and she was a keen follower of the South Sydney team. So Jenny and I, as senior executives, went to the Parramatta site. And we were delivering a talk about the vision for the organisation and its priority strategies and how that connected with people. So hundreds of people came to this. And I actually provided Jenny with a gift. And the gift was a scarf. And the first part that she sees is the colours of South Sydney, which is red and green. And as she opens it up, she then sees the colour of Parramatta, which is the blue and gold. And as she opens it up further, she sees the colours of my team, Penrith, and the crowd just went nuts. And what's interesting here is that when I visited Jenny in her office in Canberra a few weeks later, she actually had the scarf draped over her lounge chair in her office. And then later, when she left the tax office and went overseas to London to head up a revenue area over there, she actually had that scarf on the chair over there. So something like that resonates with the crowd at the time. They get a sense of enjoyment out of it. But for me, it provided Jenny with a constant reminder of the Penrith site, which I was championing. So a number of different benefits come from those sorts of things where you're thinking outside the box a little bit.
Well, it does, and I think it adds that real human connection to it, right? Because with that, she was able to see your sense of, you got it on your mug too. I love it. All right, anyway, Penrith is on the mug too. Just picked up.
And they are playing in the grand final this coming weekend.
Oh, all right. Well, there we go. Shout out. There we go. Shout out. But I think it's, not only, does it show, like you said, you were kind of barracking for that local office, if you will, right? But it also shows your sense of humor. It shows a bond and a camaraderie, right? Because again, even though she had a different team, right, you both have rugby in common, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's finding those common denominators. And with other people, it might be something totally different that you focus on, and you make sure you make the connection through that.
Yeah, and I think that's important, again, for everybody who's listening. Everyone in the world, you can find something in common with everyone in the world. The problem is, so much of the time we look for how we're different, right, instead of how we're the same. And so, I mean, again, Bruce, you and I can do this, right? Oh, Bruce, you were born in Australia and I was born in America. I mean, we can go through like all these stupid things and we can come up with this whole long list of ways that we're different. But I bet we can come up with just as long of a list of the ways that we're the same, right? And so again, I'm sure that in your career, one of the things that made you successful was looking for that common ground, right? And being able to develop the relationships. I know one of the 101 things, building blocks that you have on here too, was stay mates for life. Right, which again, I think, in that example with, was it Jenny, of the scarf, right? There was a connection that the two of you had throughout your whole career because of some of that common ground and some of the common experiences that you had together.
Absolutely. And part of the story about staying mates for life, there's people that I've worked with 30, 40 years ago. Seems like a long time when we talk about it now.
I know some of the people listening aren't even that old.
Exactly. But even if you don't see yourselves for a long, long time, when you come back together again, it's as though nothing's changed. People look older. People might be a little more frail, but the same sense of the personality is there. The sense of humour hasn't changed. The idiosyncrasies are exactly the same. And I found that out. We've had some reunions over recent years through people I've worked with over the years. And these people are exactly the same. The people you are drawn to back then, you're drawn to now. It's really funny how the human psyche works, but that's the way it is. And a few years ago now, I got an honour, and my family arranged a surprise party, and they brought hundreds of people together in a hall, and people were there from every stage of my career, from every organisation I'd work with, even through to Michael DeCenzo, Commissioner of Taxation, one of the most senior executives in the public sector in Australia. And he made the trek from Canberra to be there. And you kind of think, well, okay, I've had a bit of an impact, and I kind of like that. And the funny thing is, I had no inkling. This was a surprise party. And being an auditor for so long, you think you've developed some skills, but my family were very secretive, and I had no inkling until I got into that hall that I was getting a surprise party.
Well, but I think it's a testament too, right? To what you've done in your career and what you're sharing in this book with people is, you know, I've worked with a lot of executives over my lifetime, and I don't know how many times, you know, there'll be somebody, and I'm just going to use the name Larry because maybe this was, or maybe it wasn't his name, but anyway, right, where people would refer to somebody who had retired, and you know, they were talking about Larry, and Larry was a real asshole, right? And nobody liked him, and you know, he was effective at what he did, but he was a very difficult man to work with, and people were glad to see him go and finally retire, right? I don't think people would have shown up for Larry's party like they did for yours, right? Because as a leader, right, it's that staying mates for life. It's actually seeing people as other human beings, treating people that way. It comes back, right? And it's that people side of life in general, and especially when you're in the business world, that people sometimes forget because they think it's more important to accomplish the projects or accomplish the task than to have a relationship with another human being.
Yes, very true.
So, well, I know I wanted, you know, we could keep talking all day, but I know I wanted to bring up, because one of the things that you brought up in here was this 4I framework, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because some of these words that you use on here are words that when I was reading through this, preparing, I'm like, oh, Bruce, you used two of my favorite words, man. So I wanted to go through and talk about this because, you know, so maybe we can talk about kind of what it is, what the words are, and kind of what they mean. Because like I said, there's some of these words that people aren't really familiar with. So, you know, in this, I guess this 4I framework, I mean, how would we use this kind of in our career and thinking about this? How does it come through?
Well, I guess the 4I framework, and there's four words there, each beginning with the letter I. So intuition, ideas, intent, and impact. And I guess the 101 building blocks that I talk about all fit within the boundaries of those four elements. So if we think of it, you know, when we first join the workforce, we actually don't know what we don't know. There is so much to learn, and therefore our intuition comes to the fore, because it actually differentiates people with high potential from those people who might just be an average performance level. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, to get high above average, you need people who are at an average level and people below average. And you need to invest in the development of each of those to a different degree. But the high potential people, those that have a natural intuition, they're the ones that you can actually see where they might be in 5 years, 10 years time. And therefore you need to develop their capability differently to the run-of-the-mill kind of people. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. Then as you move through different stages of your career, you're starting to glean ideas. You're starting to see that Larry has some good attributes as well that we can learn from, as well as other people within our own business area, as well as people in other business areas as well. So we're getting all of these new ideas and we're developing fresh ideas ourselves. And then we start reaching levels of being a supervisor or a manager or an executive. And once we get there, we've got to operate with intent. People have got to understand what our intent is. What are our values and what is our vision? and what is it we're going to get there to achieve that collective intent. And that's very much ensuring that we achieve the objectives and goals of the organisation. And then some people reach a higher pinnacle again, which is at the board level, where they're sitting around in a very influential role, which can have a profound impact, not just on their own entity, but on their broader communities. So each of those letters I have a different role to play in terms of how you craft your career and how you evolve it along the way. And it's just important to have that in the back of your mind, that you go from, a very basic level of just having intuition to developing ideas to having intent and ensuring people follow you, and then having a broader impact. And I know that there's things that I can do at a board level that can have an impact on not just my local area, but in terms of my state, in terms of my country, and broadly, globally, because I speak to people all over the world. And that's where we can leverage our individual talents and their reputation that we forge.
Well, because I think it's interesting, like you said, as you're progressing through your career, you kind of start moving into some of these other eyes, but as well, to where it's like, and this is where I see some people kind of trip up, is they kind of forget about some of the younger ones, or about some of the other ones. And it's not necessarily about maturing through and only doing one, but being able to balance all of these as well, right? And to me, I mean, two of my favorite words are intuition and intent, because I think especially today we've gotten to where we're so reliant on just what I call the science side of things, that we forget the art side of things, or we forget the intuition side of things. And I was anyway, you had to be there for the speech, but I just gave a speech where I used a caveman example of, trying to look at the science behind the probability of a saber-toothed tiger coming out. We're hungry, we got to go get food. Oh, it's only a 7.4% chance, right? And so you go up to the door and you're getting ready to go, and you're like, oh, I don't have a very good feeling about this. Oh, don't worry, right? And we push the poor sucker out the door. Yeah. Well, because their intuition, right, was coming in and telling them, no, I don't know that that's really what I need to do. And so many times I think people kind of push that off and think, oh, I can't do that. And that's where some of this emotional intelligence, some of these other words come into it, that no, I mean, like you said, the people who are more intuitive, especially earlier on in their career, those are the people that usually make it further, right? Because they know how to trust their gut. They know how to make the quicker decisions and trust themselves. And then the same thing with intent, is it's like, I can do something, but my intent behind doing the thing is more important than the thing as well, right?
It's true. And you've got to be genuine with your intent. So if you reach those very high levels within your organization, people have to have confidence in what you're saying. And therefore, if you're preaching an intent that is at odds with how you act yourself, people aren't going to follow you. You've got to be very genuine with your intent.
Yeah, because and that's that goes back to some of the integrity and other things like that too. But as a leader, it's also where you're able to get some benefit of the doubt, I think too, right? Because again, we're all human, we're fallible, we make mistakes. And I remember, at different points in my career, in my life, both at work and personally, right, where maybe somebody did something to me that I was like, oh, that was that wasn't cool, right? And I would have been like livid, angry, going off on somebody, but I had history with that person. And so, even though something happened to me, the thought that goes through my mind is, I don't think that's what Bob intended, because Bob's not that kind of person, right? And so even though he did this thing that maybe was hurtful or whatever else, I've got to assume that Bob's intent was not to hurt me,
yes,
right? And that's where I think, to kind of tie back in on some of the people things that we've been talking about, when people know you and they know your heart, they know who you are, they know the place of intention that you come from as well, right? But that gets built up over time. That's part of these people skills, that you're talking about in the book.
It is. And one of the things that I put a lot of effort into within the book is to recognize that the stories I'm sharing and the insights that I'm sharing aren't just their own. They come from other people. So I actually close the book with a little section there where I talk about 24 people, I call them legends, 24 legends who inspired me. And within that, I've got a dozen people who sat above me in, board chair roles or executive roles or chief executive roles or whatever. And then a dozen people who were peers or at a lower level to me. And I also managed to get the balance right in terms of gender. So it was really important for me to actually draw that out, not just to recognize these people, but to press the point very clearly that success doesn't come from your own efforts individually. They come from what you do with other people. And therefore, let's not forget that they're an important part of that journey.
Well, they are a very important part of the journey. And as you were talking about that, there were a few faces in my career that kind of jumped out, right? Like I remember, one person, I was young, I had two little kids, I was still in college, working for a big company in the accounting department. And there was an accounting role that came open, an accountant one position, right? So entry level accountant. I was still an intern in college, and I remember, having this struggle of here I am, earning like $6 or $7 an hour. I've got, two little kids and a wife, and gosh, that it seemed like so much money for that entry level job, right? And so I put in an application because I was qualified. Yeah, I was a few months away from getting my degree, but I really was already pretty much doing the job. I knew the job. And so, talk with my wife about it, and I put in my application for it. And I remember the guy who was our controller. Normally he wouldn't talk to an accounting intern. He knew who I was and he was nice to me and everything. But I remember he called me into his office, which was kind of a big deal, right? Because here's this guy that's, probably 40 years older than me, right? Yeah. And he says, Jason, I just have to tell you that we're going to take out your application. We're not going to put it through or have you go through the interview process. And I'm like, why? And he's like, I see the potential that you have, and this is not the job for you. You're going to graduate. You're going to go to work in public accounting. You need to have a totally different career. I'm not going to let you shoot yourself in the foot by getting this job now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And at the time, maybe a little disappointed again, because like you said, right, it was a lot of money different, right? But he was so right. And I am so grateful for him. He did a few other things for me over my career too, but for having people like that, and I think that that's one of the things that we forget sometimes, is that we are all connected in some way or another too, right? And it's about giving back. It's about paying it forward. It's about, treating everybody with respect. And, so when you do have your retirement party, a couple hundred people are going to show up and, like did for yours, right? You've had an amazing career over the last 50 years, or people wouldn't show up because you're a good human being. That's why I like you, man.
Thank you. We're very humbled.
Well, but it's just truth to the fact that, I think sometimes people feel like you got to be an asshole to get ahead in this life, but you don't have to be that way.
No, not at all. And I think you've got to invest in the development of the next generations that are coming through. And
Mhm.
I know that I took a particular interest in graduate recruitment, and I used to, at different times, we would have 3, 4, 5, 6 people as graduates coming into our internal audit teams. And I made a special case that whenever I visited that particular site, whether it was down in Melbourne or Canberra or within Sydney, I would actually have meetings with the graduates. Some of them would be one-on-one. Some of them would be, the group of 3 or 4 graduates at that particular site. And some of them would remark that they'd never actually seen their manager's manager, let alone the senior executive. And I thought that was really sad. And what we used to do, sometimes we would have a conversation around what they were studying as that part of their graduate internship. Others, they would come and they wouldn't really have a topic they wanted to talk about, which suited me fine, because then I could talk about something that I thought was important for them and get their interest in that. So I actually thought it was really worthwhile, and that resulted in a whole bunch of them staying within the internal audit profession. It also meant that they would go out and talk to other graduates within the organisation who then wanted to have a stint in internal audit. Even though they were coming from a HR background or marketing background or whatever, they saw the value of coming and working with internal audit for a 3, 4, 5 or 6 month rotation, and learning some skills around governance and risk and compliance and assurance. And for me, that was really important, because that also meant that down the track, internal auditors had ambassadors in management or executive positions. And I think it's a circle that joins. You've got to make sure that people coming through into graduate roles, very junior roles, understand what the gig is about. And, when they do that, they can sort of find a bit of that passion that we might have as well.
Yeah, well, and it's it's that good reminder again of always treating other people the way we'd want to be treated as
Yes.
well. Like
Yes.
you said, I mean, it was such a surprise for those newer entry level folks to say, well, I don't even get to talk to my supervisor's manager, and here you are, like the big boss, coming and talking to me just like I'm another human being, right? And I think sometimes, again, it's the further up a lot of people get in an organization, they forget or they lose touch with that human connection of the people that are there, and why that's so important, from a leadership perspective. So
Yeah, very much.
yeah, so I guess again, we could keep talking all day. But I guess many final kind of comments or things that you want to make sure and leave with people. I mean, again, obviously everybody go out, get Rising from the Mailroom to the Boardroom, Bruce's new book, and we'll make sure and put a link to that so you can find that as well. But final thoughts for people as well, on how they can be successful in their career.
I think it's as simple as do your best in whatever you do. Make sure you find the passion. Make sure you're having fun with what you're doing. And your career isn't going to just be all upward. There's going to be times where things don't go quite right. So be prepared for the both upward and downward spirals you might have within a career. And just do your best. And if you do your best and you continue to learn, and if you act as a sponge, take in the insights you get from people that you have a high regard for, take in what you can when you go to training courses, take in the opportunities you have for professional development, and just be really genuine in what you do. Your career will just find, a rhythm that you're happy with.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's, it's that as you kind of, brought home again, that enthusiasm to learn that we kind of talked about before. And the fact that, yeah, it's not always going to just be right. I mean, sometimes there's going to be lateral moves. Sometimes there's going to be some setbacks. I've seen that before, where people maybe got promoted too early. They weren't ready. They weren't able to kind of perform at that particular area, had to take a step back. Later on, then they're able to kind of come forward, right? And that having fun and realizing it's just a job, right?
Exactly.
At the end of the day, And sometimes I think we take ourselves too serious, and we just need to have fun as we're going along. And the more, like you said, genuine that we can be, the more authentic we are of who we are and doing our best in whatever that looks like, it's going to serve you well in your career.
It will, for sure.
It will. I mean, because again, at the end of the day, no, when we're on our deathbed, not that we're ever going to get there, but I've heard a bunch of those surveys and data that's been collected on that, right? And when people are reflecting back on life, it's usually not, gee, I wish I would have worked more. It's usually, gee, I wish I'd been a kinder person. I wish I'd had more fun. I wish I'd, that kind of stuff. And the ironic thing, and your career is truth to this too, right? The more fun you have, the more genuine you are, the more you connect with people, it's actually really good for your career too.
It is. And one of the significant learnings I had when I did a management development course 20 or 30 years ago was, let's sit down now and write our own eulogy. And if we write our own eulogy now, we can actually reflect on that as we move through, and it can actually influence how we behave and what we focus on, which comes back to what you were saying, make sure that we are genuine in what we do and that we do care for other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Because ultimately that's the key to it. In fact, it reminds me of the Harvard has done a study for like the last 70 or 80 years. They took a graduating class and they've like followed up with these people for 75 or 80 years. And the one correlation that they had for a long, healthy, and happy life was the quality of the relationships of the people.
Yeah.
And so, that's true in our personal life. It's true in our business life as well. A lot of times we forget about, and we don't spend as much time developing and maintaining those relationships, but it's that human side that you're talking about. And when we do that, not only is it good for our career, but it actually makes us happy too, which, go figure, who'd want to be happy, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, Bruce, as always, it is a pleasure to talk to you, man. Thank you. Appreciate you actually putting, everything that you have into this book. I've read through some of the pre stuff, and it's fabulous. So go out and get it as well. So
thanks very much, Jason.
Thank you.
Always good to talk to you, mate.
Good talking to you.
Okay then.